Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar titled Progress in Fuel Use, a transition from full fossil fuel to electrified transportation. My name is Fatma. I'm the International Relations Coordinator of the TESPAM, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's discussion. As we all know, a transition from fossil fuels to electrified transportation, one of the most critical topics of our quest for sustainable energy solution and environmental preservation. So today, we are honored to have with us an esteemed expert in this field, Dr. Masroor Kubaisi, head of the Department of Mechanical Engineering at College of Engineering and Technology from Doha University. After his presentation, which he will share with us about his expertise and perspective, we will have 15 minutes question and answer session where you will have opportunity to ask questions and engage in our meaningful dialogue. Without further ado, please join me to welcoming our esteemed speaker, Dr. Masroor Kubaisi. Doctor, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fatima. I don't know if you can see my shared presentation.
No, we cannot see. Maybe we can try it again.
Yes, I will do. How about now?
No, yeah, we can see. Everything's okay.
Great. So today I will talk about my progress in this area, which is about fuel use and the transition from full fossil fueled to fully electrified transportation and how this can be bridged. And the speech will start with, the background, talking about the background of the topic, my background in this research, and the motivation. Then we will move to where did we start in this area, then how we move to electrified, and where are the gaps in between using current or conveniently used fossil fuels in many applications, including transportation, and the rationale for moving to electrical vehicles and other similar applications. And then we end up with the conclusions. So to start with, as we all know, there are 17 SDGs proposed by the UN, and everyone in the world needs to shift towards that. It's sooner or later. This is, a critical matter, and it's demanding and affecting all researchers, industrialists, and academics equally. The relevance of this talk will be to SDGs 4, 6, 7, 9, 11, and 13. I will not recall them, but they are all highlighted in this slide. And more relevance will be to SDG 7, which is talking about affordable and clean energy. That is summarized by the Assembly in 2015, that the energy needs to be affordable, reliable, and sustainable for all humans in the globe. And to understand what it means, we can look at two important factors here that can improve our energy efficiency, which is talking about how the sources of this renewable energy or energy in general. Are these sources depleting? Are they clean? Are they sustainable? And the storage, how this energy can be stored. So these are the two important questions to answer. And there are many reasons behind it, such as where the world was in 2000, how it moved, how that evolved, and where we stand now. Up to last year or a couple of years ago, the figures show we are still well behind. Many countries in the world are trying to move towards the SDG regulations and guidance, but as we can see from the figures, we are nowhere near the targets, and we need to speed up the work. So to talk about that, I need to start from my story, where I started. I started working in the area of thermofluids in 2007 at Sussex University Thermofluids Mechanics Research Center, which is a Rolls-Royce University Technology Center. And after that, I moved to Serra Ricardo Lab in University of Brighton in 2012. And that's in the southern part of the country in the UK, and collaborated with the Ricardo company at that time. And ever since, my research started evolving in this area. And the motivation was, at that time, there were calls from environmentalists and government bodies, industrialists, for a replacement of fuel with bioenergy. And there are many reasons behind it. There are economic reasons, there are environmental reasons, there are policy makers behind it. So there are a variety of factors. And for example, the UK Department for Transport was contacting our research center at that time and asking us to feed research into this area as well. So it was a critical matter. And when I started working in this area, we found many gaps in research. So because I was working on the computational development part, I found many gaps in research, such as CFD software tools did not take into account the fully physics and chemistry underlying the processes preceding the onset of combustion. Example of this, the temperature gradients inside droplets were not taken into account. The species diffusions, which means the components, every single component in the fuel was not taken into account when they degrade at the surface of the droplet and inside the droplet. And many of you will question, why is this important? I can show you the results of that later in this presentation, as well as the recirculation, which the first think about this started in 1989, to think about the recirculation in droplets and how important is that on many aspects of combustion, as well as non-combustion processes that have automation and sprays in them. And adding to that, CFD software tools at that time, about 16 years ago, were computationally expensive. It wasn't easy to deal with complex methods, and especially if we want to do DNS, direct numerical simulation, it becomes even more complicated and more timely work, which is computationally expensive work to do. And when we looked through literature, there weren't sufficient attempts to look into that. There were many fuel surrogates, which are either research surrogates, such as research octane number, or there were some experimental attempts, and they didn't take into account the underlying physics. So they can be applicable in certain scenarios, and when you extend the range of application or the real full cycle simulation of the engine, then these surrogates fail to meet the demand. As a result, at that time, we came out with the idea of the multidimensional quasi-discrete model, and that was based on a model proposed by Professor Sajan in 2006. He's a leading mathematician. He was at Sheffield University and moved to Brighton at that time, and he proposed discrete component model. And my area was to shift into multidimensional quasi-discrete model, which means instead of taking one group of components into account, we take many groups, because if we look at diesel, for instance, it has not only alkanes, it has bicycloalkanes, it has tetradecanes, and many other groups of components, so not only one group. And these take into account these groups of components will make the software tool even more expensive and more timely to run. As a result, we needed to replace them with auto selection algorithm to select the components that can be represented for the fuel. As a result, the conclusion was that new models were needed to account for the full composition and to take into account the chemical details for the atomization, heating, evaporation, and combustion. So each part of these processes is quite detailed, and to talk about it in one presentation is unfair. So we will talk at the top surface level of it without mentioning the mathematical modeling behind it. But to refer to where it comes from, I will share the some screenshots of the publications in literature that our audience can refer to for further information and enhanced knowledge about the topic. So starting with the discrete component model, In this, the heat transfer and diffusion of species inside the droplets and monodispersed droplets and the atomization of sprays all take into account, as well as not only the thermal conductivity but the effective thermal conductivity and effective diffusivity. And the meaning of effective, it means it's not only based on the temperature gradient, but it's based on the diffusion. Because what happens basically, the species with nanoseconds, actually, not only microseconds, within nanoseconds, the volatile components, as we all know, and chemical engineers know, they evaporate much quicker than the heavier components. And within nanoseconds, you find suddenly the fuel composition is different. As a result, the properties of these fuel droplets or the fuel contents are completely different. And when the properties are different, the combustion characteristics become completely different. So all of these underlying physics were not fully taken into account in the past. And as a result, this model was very important, and it was crucial for moving forward in the understanding of the combustion model. And luckily, most of these codes that we developed at that time were embedded in many commercial CFD software tools such as ANSYS Fluent. So if you go to ANSYS Fluent, you will find the monodispersed and multi-component droplets function there already embedded. Moving forward, the multidimensional quasi-discrete model was further developed to reduce the computational time by, instead of having, for example, in diesel, we had 270 components. That's talking about normal diesel. According to the European standard, it contains that number without even having any, leads in it or any other, or sulfur. So that means it's very complicated, and take into account each component is by itself is computationally expensive. So we had to replace each groups of components by one or two quasi components to be represent in terms of all these processes, the thermodynamic and chemical properties can be represented at each microsecond in the process, what they look like. And these quasi components are hypothetical components, they are not real. Because in real scenario, as you know, the chemical formula contains, if we talk about alkanes, for example, the normal alkanes, the chemical formula should be CnH2n plus 2. And if we were to talk about the hypothetical component, instead of that, the n here is not integer value. It will be a represent of the carbon numbers that are not integer, which means they don't exist in real life. But they, in the simulation and modeling, they are represent of their groups. If we talk about alkanes, for example, we could have 5 or 4 represent components that can behave exactly as if the whole group of components are present in the real simulation. So that is the nearest picture to what we have done, just to make it easier for the audience to understand the details of it. As a result, the all of these fractions of components are ensured or verified to make sure they meet the requirement. And the as a result, the total number of fractions should be always uh, normalized and equal to the total number of components without losing the impact of any of them. And this shows how the auto selection of these components is made to make it easy for the end users to be able to use the code. So moving forward with that, because talking about all these topics make the audience bored, so we need to talk about more fruitful results on how this can shift further into more applications. So we applied that to gasoline fuel engines, for example, and tried to see the impact of it, and then moved to real diesel engines and try to understand how the diesel components take into account. Most of researchers before that time were assuming that diesels are alkanes. Even in many cases, industrialists were thinking that we could replace diesel with N-heptane or N-dodecane. And that's what I had the impression when I started, especially working with Ricardo, which is one of the top, testing engine providers. This is the impression the industrialists had at that time. So moving into this direction means bringing a lot of benefits to industry to have a better understanding of how the combustion is taking place. And this is an example table of the diesel fuel compositions, take into account all these components, and then moving into the application of the model we developed into on these compositions and how the diffusion of species are taken into account. For example, at the surface of droplets, you could see at the initial time this what the composition looked like, and as the evaporation starts, this is in milliseconds, by the way. So this is large droplet. As a result, you will see it's taking up to about 2.2 milliseconds for the droplet to evaporate, just to have a better understanding of what it looks like. And you could see that these species are not the same. At each fractions of these milliseconds, you could see the diffusion of species is taking place, and you have different compositions within the droplet and at the surface of the droplet, of course. And this can be also interpreted into how the temperature gradient is behaving inside the droplet. So you could see that from the center of the droplet to the surface of the droplet, there is temperature gradient. In the past, droplets used to be treated as a lump system because they are very small. They are extremely small, particles. So many scientists they used to assume that droplets should be one temperature. There is no point of taking into account the difference in temperature between the center and the surface. But when we looked into it using this model, we realized that there is a big difference, and that could be also due to the differences in species, which affects the thermal conductivity of the droplet. And because the thermal conductivity of droplet from one layer to another inside droplet is different, you could see that has significant impact on how the thermodynamic and transport properties behave inside the droplet and at the surface of droplet at that time. Okay, this model was validated against experimental data at that time for certain input parameters. And moving forward, we had to formulate surrogates that can be useful for industrialists. And these surrogates need to be realistic, because when we dealt with the quasi components, as I said, these molecular formula were hypothetical, not realistic. If you show this to any chemist, they will not understand the meaning of these numbers, because as CFD modeler, to me this makes sense because I look at it from mathematical point of view. But to chemical engineers, this doesn't mean anything, because these chemical formulas don't exist in real life. So after making sure this is applicable and solvable, we need to make sure they are representative to chemists and or chemical engineers, to make sure that this can be used in real life scenarios. And when we talk about fuel surrogates, we need to show the industrialists what type of components can be represented to these fuels at all scenarios, or to the nearest approximate. As a result, we move forward in application to biodiesel fuel, take into account all these effects of composition, and this was published. Then, after dealing with all of that, there was a time to move away from, these detailed composition to something more realistic, which is starting with application to aero engines as well as the reciprocating engines. So we started with applying to industrial gas turbine engines, for example, and so how that can be, realized to make sure the models work. And as a result, we started moving into the application to these types of engines and tried to validate that, and also looked at how ANSYS could be improved. ANSYS fluently, I'm talking about, take into account all the models, how much we could improve the model. And we could see that at that time, ANSYS didn't have this as a package. Now it has it as a function. We used to use user-defined function to improve the software and see how far we are or how close we are to real industrial applications and to experimental validation. And did the same thing by looking into diffusion of species and looking into droplet lifetimes as well to see how using these models can be impacting the droplet lifetimes, which is the processes preceding the onset of combustion as well as combustion itself. So these were the applications and the results that we had. This is a typical example of the results, not everything, of course. And that's how the engine behaved due to using the new model and looking at, of course, different sections of the engine to see the distribution of other species such as the emissions, NOx mass fractions, CO2 mass fractions, and O2 mass fractions inside the engine, whether they're homogeneous or not, and compare them to real life scenarios as well, and so on. So that was all carried on research. And it was also published in one of our papers, joint with researchers from Turkey at that time. And we moved forward into, as well as improving ANSYS, further improving our model to make sure it works properly and it's more precise. And we published further work into the developed model in application to wider range of combustion systems. All of these were published, a variety of approaches were used, and all shared with the interested readers in a variety of journal articles. And we moved into the improvement of the engine itself, how to improve the pre-mixture, for example, process to make sure this represents, the tuning of the engine represents a better quality combustion. So this was a good move, which was enhancing the industry as well as making sure our model is applicable to industry. So all of these applications were strong proofs and evidence that our models are of significant contribution to industry and research at that time. With all these validations and approximations, and as well as improvement to CFD modelers, because here the computational time has been significantly improved, but without making sure without a sacrifice of the accuracy of the model. So as we improve the CPU efficiency, we could see that there will be higher errors, exposing the model to higher errors, while here, take into account the full composition of species is zero error, which is 100% realistic. As we move forward to reduce the computational time, we of course expose the model to some errors, and we could compromise somewhere in the middle to make sure we have highly efficient approach without sacrificing the accuracy of these models. All of these were published in one of my papers to summarize how these models evolved and how they were improved, and also the improvement or tuning of the engine was also jointly published with many colleagues who work in this area. I also summarized all of these findings in one of my books in the past about the heating and evaporation of multi-component droplets in application to combustion systems, and how we apply, for example, the variety of biofuels and what are the challenges and opportunities in this area. It was also summarized in one of my books in the past. And we had special issue at that time as well, open for researchers to share their findings so we can move forward with all these special issues into a new generation of a new generation of modeling approaches, a new generation of industrial findings and challenges. And then at that time, we were told funding resources dried in the combustion area. And we were told we need to move away in order to attract funding. And they were right, because apparently the classical approach of combustion was to use fossil fuels. And the Western world is struggling with accessing fossil fuels. So, and the rest of the world will also struggle at some point, nearer or later, because of the we getting closer to the depletion of these fuels. So we need to think of alternatives. And these alternatives, as mentioned in the past, need to be sustainable, affordable, clean. There are a variety of aspects needed to be and affordable, accessible also by a variety of people, not only to rich people. So how can we move forward? So we needed to think of, first of all, bridging between fossil fuel and the biofuels. Biofuels are renewable, but they are not clean. So we are solving a small portion of the problem, but not the big part of the problem. So we started with thinking of how we blend these fuels at higher ratios without affecting existing engines, because you can't really ask people who drive, second-hand cars to throw their cars away. So we needed to think of approach that maybe not affecting these let's say customers, by advising the fuel providers at the pump, when they mix fuel with other components or other ratios of biofuels or additives, how much that will affect the engines, and whether this is feasible or not. And that was before the introduction of the legislation in the UK. So this, as you can see in the paper, this is published in 2017. Just later, 1 year later, the UK put the legislation of mixing, actually. So this was ahead of thinking ahead of how the governments were thinking, that this is coming sooner or later. Then we had more motivation to move into that direction, which is thinking about the impact of biodiesel on flex fuel. And flex fuel is a fuel that you mix ethanol into diesel or gasoline into diesel. So ethanol is thought of a bio replacement of gasoline, and in which when we have that mixture, you have a problem with the polarity of the fuel. So we needed intermediate solution, and we tried to, with another renewable source of fuel, which is biodiesel, and how this has impact on it. So at that point, we started thinking more seriously about transition to SDG 7, and we thought about other details in the model that can make improvement to this mixture, such as the activity coefficient. And as a result, although there are these, thermodynamic properties might not be thought of seriously, they have serious impacts on how these fuels behave and how we can resolve this matter. So all of these were shared with the public through our research articles and publications. And after that, we need to cope with the, game-changing proposals by, especially by politicians and many academics and media, that electric vehicles are coming and people is shifting in towards that. So are we really ready to move to electrified, or what they claim to be clean technologies? Are they really clean? So my opinion is not important here, because there could be many conflict or contradictory opinion regarding this matter, especially me coming from dirty, what is described as dirty combustion area. They're using fossil fuel, moving to electric. Maybe there is rejection by the society of combustion to think about this as a good approach. So what we need is to have a clear transition in between. So maybe thinking about hybrid electric vehicles as one way in the transition. As a result, we started thinking of how we can use existing technologies in improving emerging technologies such as electrified vehicles. So we thought of the hybrid battery thermal management. So the battery itself, as you know, more than 70 of it is made from fossil fuel. I mean, these polymers that make the battery itself, they are coming from fuel, crude oil. They're not coming from the middle of nowhere. So the source of this new technology is not 100% renewable, and it's not sustainable either. So how can we cope to make this work? And what is the transition for scientists or engineers like myself to, you know, feed their knowledge or their findings into this type of technology? So we were thinking of using, for example, a fuel to cool the batteries. Since fuel will be in the tank of these vehicles, the hybrid electric vehicles, let's make use of it in other ways, as well as turning the engine. It's important to make another use, which is preparing it to the injection rail, maybe before that, heat it up. And at the same time, these batteries need cooling. It's crucial for the batteries inside these electric vehicles to be maintained at certain temperature. Otherwise, there will be big problem, especially in the cold regions. People think the opposite. Actually, in cold regions, you need to expose the battery to some thermal shock in order to make it ready to work or to start. So as a result, this thermal shock can cause damage to the battery. So you need to make sure it's maintained within good temperature and good temperature distribution as well. So you don't want to have high temperature difference between one cell and another. And that's when it's not exposed to sufficient cooling. And when we use fuel to cool it, we manage to suppress that, as you can see here. So the difference between one cell and another is reduced hugely. This is the type of qualitative data I can share, which is already published in our first paper in this area in 2022. Now moving into wider range of battery thermal management using variety of types of fuels, and also in applications to variety of renewable energy and sustainable energy systems, and moving into the details of how the batteries works and whether the batteries can be used in other types of applications or types of resources of energy within the grid, and moving into even wider range of applications beyond simple energy or conventional energy systems, such as using vortex tube generators, thinking about them, and also using hydro-powered systems to generate energy, or to extract energy from the moving water, which is hydro pumped. And an example of this shown here is the hydro powered Bunyip pump. Bunyip is multi-story pump that uses two sides of the pump. One side is to make a reciprocating movement, and the other side is to deliver water. And this was successful in one of our GCRF projects when we had to apply it in rural areas in the region of conflict between Pakistan and India, in Kashmir. We had to apply this type of system to solve a problem where there's no access to electricity, no access to fuel at all. So these are other types of energy resources can be used based on existing experience in CFD modeling, for example. And this work was published recently in Inventions Journal. And I summarize most of my work in the past in this textbook, which is joined by two colleagues. I appreciate their contribution. One of them is a well-known name in his area. They both actually work in combustion. One of them is hydrogen combustion, and the other one is fossil fuel combustion and fire suppression from Sakarya University. So this was a great joint work. And currently, we're thinking ahead of the next generation of energy resources, which is the smart energy materials and sustainable devices. And this is a call to all researchers and engineers to contribute to this special issue so we can have a better understanding of where the world should be moving in terms of research to cope with the need and demands for affordable energy resources. And I thank our dean for making a good contribution to this special issue and to bring success to it. So we still have this open, the call, until October, and I invite all colleagues and researchers to feed into that where possible. Just to summarize the talk of today, because I've been talking and I can talk forever, and it's too boring for you, so let's stop at this point and to summarize that there have been several applications using the internal combustion experience and CFD modeling, which goes beyond what people think of fossil fuel. We can actually shift into sustainable and affordable energy systems. And there are detailed chemistry behind it that can be used and facilitated properly to give identical results to experimental data. And the transition that is being called by politicians and many, media and public need to be well educated to bridge between the existing research, more than 100 years or sometimes even hundreds of years in this area. To move suddenly to clean technology shouldn't be sold to the market without careful consideration. There needs to be a bridge, research expertise in between to be able to, make a smooth shift without future harsh consequences. And the transition does not require from researchers to change their discipline completely, but they can actually feed their knowledge into that research. And as a result, this talk is, a call for joint collaborations between a variety of researchers from different disciplines to feed our knowledge together into useful impacts in the future. And examples of collaboration with many researchers, especially from Turkey in the past, has been very successful and promising. As a result, I would like to conclude my talk at this point and thank you all for giving me your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mansur Kubaisi. It was really detailed and amazing presentation, step by step. We just saw the all details and developments and your studies and everything was really insightful presentation. And we also have one question from Professor Dr. Mustafa İlbaş, Gazi University Department of Engineering System Engineering. And first, I want to deliver his thanks to you for this great presentation. And he's asking, is the best combustion model changing depending on combustion phenomena?
I'm asked a question by combustion expert, so I don't call myself as more knowledgeable than Dr. İlbaş. With all credit to all his contribution in this area, is a very well-known name. But I will have to answer his question. As we all know, the combustion model does depend, yes, on combustion phenomena, but there are also many other parameters. So if we call phenomena, does it mean the input parameters, or does it mean the conditioning of the engine itself? So everything does depend, is making a factor in this. And I gave an example of activity factor, activity coefficient, which wasn't something that people would think is important in the combustion criteria, but it does make a big difference in the results because as I mentioned earlier, the processes preceding the onset of combustion can make up to 70% impact on how the combustion looks like in terms of especially the emissions and the power outputs. I hope I answered Dr. Mustafa İlbaş.
Thank you so much for your answer. And for our panel evolution and closing speech, I will welcome to our Vice President Ali Murat Becerikli. And floor is yours, Ali Murat Becerikli. Your microphone is closed.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kubeisi, because this topic is very important. Everyone is talking about the green transition based on the electrical vehicles, but you also warn us that what will the existing ones, existing factories, existing combustion technologies will happen in the future. So this, your studies at least showed us that there are alternative models, especially on the ethanol mixture and biodiesel alternatives to overcome with the CO2 mitigation problems regarding the international intergovernmental agreements in this area. First of all, what is your opinion on the biodiesel issues? Because as you mentioned in your presentation, this biodiesel does not reflect enough cleaning on the pollution based on the nitrogen, as I understand. Am I right?
So,
because the European Council has a limitation on the NOx emissions. That's why in the recent years, the diesel engines production is limited in the European Union, so that for the latest decisions of the United Nations, they will follow the European Union's criteria on the climate change constraints. The European Union studies will be the governmental desk, like a desk. They will follow that, so that the Paris Agreement will be binding on the issues regarding the European Union issues. As a summary, I would like to say, if the European Union regulations will be spread with the United Nations recommendations, so that the biodiesel could be a solution regarding the NOx.
yes, you are right. I mean, NOx is a big, factor that can be more damaging in high temperature combustion. And it's also when people propose hydrogen combustion. I mean, NOx is a big problem. Of course, we got rid of CO2, but reducing CO2 doesn't mean better combustion. And this is, your question is very good actually, and is very much responding or educating people who think about CO2 as a source of pollution. And there are other sources of pollution that politicians don't talk about because maybe they don't know. Even the public, they are not educated enough to understand that CO2 is not as much dangerous as other pollutants, such as sootings and NOxes. And NOx is a major cause of cancer, as we all know. So there have been many proposals in the past, and they are not something new. I mean, more than 2 decades, people talked about how to reduce NOx using a SCR system. As combustion people, we all know that SCR is also already existing in the market, but it's not alternative solution, or not definite solution to the problem. But as a transition, I mean, biodiesel is renewable. At least, and it has many sources of biodiesel. I mean, we worked on 22 types of biodiesel. Some of them are from waste cooking oil, and it's part of the story that I didn't mention in this presentation is feeding that into a local bus in Brighton, the Big Lemon. If you Google it, you will find the research on it that we fed into. Big Lemon bus was a bus that we proposed at that time, 2012, to local council in Brighton to make use of the waste cooking oil, because Brighton was a tourist area where they had hundreds of hotels, and they had tons of cooking oil wasted from restaurants and the hotels, and using that cooking oil to produce biodiesel was a piece of cake for them. But like you said, this is not a solution. This is a temporary transition, and that's why I call it transition, but not a solution. for SDG, to meet SDG. And this solution is not sustainable. It's not long term. So we need to move into long term. But talking about electrical vehicles, it's also a transition. I don't call it solution. Electric vehicles, that many people call it a solution, I think we all agree as scientists, this is not a solution at all. If we talk about real impacts, transport is not the real impacts or not the real factor or game changing in this matter at all. Anyway, there are bigger impacts, and there are nuclear effects as well, which are used as clean sources of energy. So we don't want to go beyond the scope of my talk. Otherwise, might all end up in cells that we don't want to, because many of our opinions can be contradictory to the media or to the politicians' opinions. But we try to educate people that talking about solutions is proposing ideas and calling them solutions is wrong. We can call them transitional, because as I mentioned, even batteries themselves, 70 to 95% of batteries are made from crude oil, fossil fuel, these polymaterials in the batteries, they are not really, and the plastics, they are not really sustainable or renewable resources, as they called, or not clean, not even clean. And in the long term, these batteries need to be recycled. Where are they going to recycle them? So, talking about this as a solution is wrong. I'm saying that from the beginning. I'm not proposing solution. I'm proposing, ways of transition and calling scientists to feed their knowledge into that. That's why we have, a special issue to call for papers in this area, and to be able to educate each other on how to move forward.
Maybe adding Mustafa Bey's question, the combustion issue, the hydrogen is one of the most topic, because as you mentioned, the battery is not a green transition on the electrical vehicles, but maybe the fuel cells with hydrogen and the alternative, the hydrogen blended combustion
Yes.
engines, maybe the solution for the pollutions. What do you think about the hydrogen as a combustion material?
I agree with you. Like I said, I'm not expert. I don't call myself expert, but from my thinking, hydrogen is not a good solution in direct combustion for several reasons. Firstly, we're talking about NOx here. It has a high NOx production as well. Also, producing hydrogen isn't free. Actually, it's very expensive. And talking about whether hydrogen produced as a blue hydrogen or green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is even more expensive. And blue hydrogen is coming from, again, fossil fuel or, other natural gases. So it's not really, if we talk about the majority of hydrogen production, is not really a sustainable solution to our affordable energy problem. So again, we are not ticking the box for SDG 7 as should be. But we talk about it as a transition and can be used as small energy systems, as in fuel cells, and it's a transition solution. And talking about it in hybrid electric vehicles to replace fuel is not feasible. Hydrogen itself, the storage of hydrogen is a big problem as well. Storage and transport of hydrogen. One of the research, work in the past was on producing hydrogen on board to avoid this problem of transport and refueling using lithium bromide. And if you Google the hydrogen car in Coventry, we took part in that about 8 years ago, when we were thinking of having, lithium bromide system in the car to produce hydrogen as the car is driven. And that could be also a transitional solution for transports. There could be many ideas, but I don't call them as solution, because we shouldn't have one solution. We should have many proposals for a solution. At the end, this talk is debatable. I'm not saying what I say is definitely what should people follow. because I'm talking to people who are most likely more knowledgeable than myself in these areas. So it's debatable, and I accept comments or let's say rejections to these ideas.
So we cannot accept the EVs are the absolute solution. Either the other combustion alternatives are on the basket as well, to be compared, to be discussed. Some of them has different positive sides, but some of them has negative on at the same time.
The idea of all of this is that, like I said, when we talked about it at the beginning, we said this energy needs to be clean, sustainable, and affordable. So the current technologies in the market, they don't meet all of these. I mean, some of the technologies are made for rich people. If we want to be honest about it, not made for, at least not for us or the audience in this room. Maybe there are some rich people in the audience, but I don't believe rich people would care about what science looks like. They just care about the outputs there, or the definite numbers at the end. So these, as a result, if we want to provide solutions for people who care or we care about, we need to be realistic about these solutions. Are we caring? I mean, I remember one of the people approached me from big companies about 5-6 years ago. I don't want to mention the name due to conflict of interest. They asked me to do research about droplets for the handle of one of these luxury cars, because the handle was accumulating droplets in winter, and these rich people, they don't want to catch the handle when it's got droplets. They want it to be dry. So, and they were willing to pay a lot. So that tells you that research doesn't always is honest, and we have to debate all opinions, because I don't always trust what I see in literature or what is proposed by whether researchers or politicians. We need to work together to collaborate and correct each other when we do work. So are we really, when we propose ideas, talking about all of these? Are we, when we shift from fossil fuel or conventional combustion approaches to new approaches such as electric vehicle, is it meeting the demand for the public? How many people can buy electric vehicles, and how long will these survive? Can they survive as long as the conventional engines? I mean, let's think about it more realistically. Are we really moving into helping rich people to be richer by buying these electric vehicles, or are we really trying to solve real challenges that the public are facing? I mean, fundamental people who work in research, most of them can't even afford to buy cars. So why are we thinking about moving into making a big shift without solving real problems? And in my principle as a researcher, I'm thinking of the public. I'm not thinking of what the politicians say or what rich people want. This is the principle of my research. So if we are trying to talk about it in this direction, I think we can solve problems.
Maybe in your presentation, I also once more reiterate the coolant as a fuel you have been studied at the other side of the droplets, the modern high pressure droplets for efficient combustion. So the hybrid systems may be more efficient in using the power on the combustion and both on the electrical vehicles. Maybe the hybrids will be in the table.
I totally agree. I mean, if we want to satisfy both parties, then we could talk about hybrid electric vehicles.
What I understand from all your presentation, the hybrid solutions may be the best solution.
It's the best for people like me who worked in combustion for a long time, because there are many people who worked in combustion, like Dr. Professor Ilbash. His main area was combustion, and even Dr. Soyhan, he's from Sakarya University. This is his area. So to ask them to do work on electric vehicles, they might think this is a waste of long-term experience they have in the combustion, where they think combustion is much more complicated field of science. And it's also to ask people to dump all that experience and move to electric vehicles is probably harsh, and is not so much beneficial, maybe, if you look at it from long term, so maybe the marriage or the transition between these two ideas is to think about how to use fuel in this modern technology of electrified vehicles. And one way, I'm not saying this is the only way, this is one way, is I was thinking of using fuel to manage the batteries, because thermal management in these electric vehicles is one of the most important things battery manufacturers think about. I went to one of the biggest battery manufacturing in the UK, which is called UK.
Manage the batteries, because thermal management.
Sorry, my echo.
Vehicles is one of the most important things battery manufacturers think about. I went
to. I was hearing my echo. So this could be one way. This could be one approach forward.
I think also Sir Bejekli also have a net issue. You can continue your answer, Dr. Mansour.
Yeah, that's. I think that's what I feel is the answer to Dr. Ali. So is to have a transition in between different ideas and to try to collaborate in that manner, rather than dumping someone's idea and thinking that a new idea is better.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mansour.
Thank you.
You informed us and take into attention the combustion engines once more, that this is not the end with the EVs. So the combustion engines will be in the life in the future as well.
Yes, certainly.
So we would like to give this message, and what can be done in the combustion engines. You give us several ideas. So the technology is going on with the combustion technologies on the other hand.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much,
Thank
Fatma.
you.
I thank you very much for organizing this panel.
Thank you, Fatima. Thanks all.
Thank you so much. We look forward to see you soon again in another event. It was really great presentation for us and give really great insight about this topic, or the even audience or professionals who listened to us. I'm pretty sure that they also enjoyed this presentation. See you soon again. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you so much, Bejekli. Have a good day. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.